Welcome, Buff fans. The offseason is in full swing, and Matt Smith and I are we're in full swing, I guess, after kind of digesting this last season, Matt. And it feels like the Alamo Bowl was like 2 months ago. I don't know about you, but it feels like it was a long time ago. But it was just a little over a week ago. But here we are, just having this chance to digest it. And Matt, first off, when we you first got on here, it was like, yeah, it's starting to hit that. Okay, this Shador and Travis era is over.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it feels like a while ago, but I think it's only because things, even though there wasn't a lot of football played in the month of December, there was, almost an entire month off. There was
Right.
so much going on. It just felt like the news cycle didn't stop. And so now it's like the lack of dopamine hits. You know what I
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So it's definitely a recalibration. But yeah, nice to have a little bit of downtime, certainly, and a little bit of time away to reflect on what happened and kind of get away from the loss a little bit. I will say it's sticking with me just a little bit more than I thought because I really would have wanted those guys to go out in a better note than they did. That being said, you put everything into context and you're back to gratitude and appreciation for the last 2 years because you start to remember the people more than you do the players, right? More than you do the
Yeah.
plays and what happened on the field. And this is a really, really good group of people, especially this year. I think they were last year, but it was different this year. They were much tighter knit, be it the
Mhm.
entire roster or the coaching staff. I think they had better personalities here, more that meshed what they're looking for. And it was a lot of fun. So definitely bittersweet, I would say, because the transition and the process that lies ahead that they've already undergone, right? They're already
Yeah.
undertaking that process of trying to rebuild the foundation of this team. But certainly it's starting to sink in. Like, the final NFL draft order came out, and I'm like, oh boy, it's Tennessee's on the clock at number one. Okay, is that Shador, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's definitely been an interesting week. Got a lot going on in my own head.
Yeah. And it's going to get interesting because this is the time of year now over the next 3 months, and we're going to get into this. This is not what this show's about, but this is the time of year over the next 3 months that people nitpick the top draft picks, and
Oh,
Colorado players have just not been a part of that in a very, very, very long time, and so it's going to be interesting to watch. Travis and Shador are going to be nitpicked a lot. We're already seeing it. I don't remember who it was on Rich Eisen last week saying he came out and said that he's talked to a lot of NFL execs who don't have Shador
scouts, scouts.
scouts anywhere near
Yeah,
a round one grade
yeah.
for Shador. It's like really, and so there's going to be a lot of nitpicking, and it's going to be interesting to see what people say about these guys. And Co- and again, we can get into this another show, but like I just want to say, Coach Prime, he did talk to those guys before the bowl game and said, "You guys, Travis Shador, and some of these others, watch what you're doing, because this is the time that now NFL people are going to be watching every move you make. If you go to Vegas or you go to Miami or wherever you go to party or do whatever, you better watch your back. You better, know what you're doing. Don't do anything stupid to get yourself in trouble." And um, that's just this, that's the, I guess, the ugliness of draft prep. And, you know, there's stories for years, Matt, right? I mean, Warren Sapp was one that was supposed to be a top five pick coming out of college, and all of a sudden, all these stories came out about him, and he fell in that draft, and so and wound up being, obviously a phenomenal Hall of Fame player. But every year, Randy Moss, there was stuff, he dropped because of certain stories that came out, and every year there's something. So it'll be interesting to see how those guys are picked apart. And like I said, we just haven't seen it for the Buffs because I mean, when was the last first round pick? I mean, it was Solder and Jimmy. Oh my gosh, what was Jimmy's last name?
Smith.
Jimmy Smith. Yeah, it was Solder and Jimmy Smith back in 2011, I think. So those were the
Yeah.
last first round picks for the Buffs, and they weren't high first round picks. And frankly, there wasn't a whole lot to nitpick on either one of those guys. They weren't like the top end guys that were in the spotlight a lot. So it's been a very long time.
Yeah, and we knew this was coming with draft
Yeah,
season. The takes are gonna fly. You're gonna hear all this stuff. Good luck nitpicking Travis too much. The only thing that you're really gonna hear nitpicked about Travis is how much he can play both ways. Because I don't
yeah,
think there's really much to. Maybe they'll talk about technique or something like that. But that list won't be long. They'll be able to find some more stuff on Shador to throw out there, which is why. And that was Tom Pelissero, who works for
yeah,
the
yeah,
NFL
yeah,
Network
yeah,
on Rich Eisen's podcast, and scouts are not GMs. And there's a great old line, lies, damn lies in the NFL draft. I think that's Nate Lundy, a good friend of mine, used to say that about the NFL draft. That is draft season. Everybody has a take because you have to have a take. It's your job, right? You've got to have an opinion, and it doesn't mean it's a right one or a good one or a correct one or based off proper information. It just means that you have an opinion. So a lot of them will fly, and I'm not too worried about any of that stuff because I'm very confident in who these two guys are and their backgrounds. They're
yeah,
both really good people. There's not going to be skeletons that are dug up out of the closet here with these two guys. They are exactly what you want in the top 5 of the NFL draft. You're
yeah,
drafting a franchise player. Both those guys, franchise players. And if a team was smart enough, as I suggested to Pat Shermer when we were down there in San Antonio, they'd find a way to pair them together. It won't be easy, but I think it'd be absolutely worth investigating, especially for a team like Tennessee. I mean, what does
yeah.
Tennessee have to lose right now? So they just spent the most money in free agency of any team in the NFL last offseason. That's an ownership group that's willing to spend. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. Look, I mean, we're very early on in the process. Now that the regular season officially ended yesterday, now draft season starts. And so now you're
Yeah.
going to start to see all this stuff pick up. And after the Super Bowl ends, that's when it's full steam ahead towards the combine. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But we've got a long ways to go. And we know there will be plenty of bad takes between now and then.
Yeah. Well, and the thing I wouldn't say worry about, but the unfortunate part about this is you're also going to have things that you mentioned. It's going to, good luck finding things on Travis, but look, throughout the month of December after the Heisman, he was attacked quite a bit just personally, and, that's the ugly stuff I hate seeing that,
Well, deal with it. That's
deal
the
with it,
draft,
right?
buddy.
That's
That's
the draft,
2025.
right?
If you
But
want it, it costs to be the boss. That's
right.
what I'm going to say. And
Yeah.
people, if you're that popular, will dig through your whole life. And
Yeah.
if that's if that's the worst they can find, then more power to them. So
Yeah.
I'm not really worried about any of that stuff. Is what I'm saying. I don't really feel the need to even dive into that, quite
Right.
frankly.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's the unfortunate part of what's going to happen probably over the next few months is they'll find stuff like that, unfortunately. But
It's the
um, uh,
game.
yeah, but we're going to talk about those two guys during this podcast in a different way, because what we're going to do today is kind of recap the season. And I wrote about this in the Daily Camera the other day, and we're going to kind of talk about this. I want to get your take, and I'm going to give the takes I wrote about the other day. Basically grading this past season and giving out some off-season awards from what we saw. These are the Brian Howell Matt Smith awards. So
Right.
they're not they don't come with a fancy trophy or a watch or
No,
anything like that.
no. Pat on the back.
You're not getting a watch made for these guys, are you?
No, I'm not.
Oh,
Just
okay,
a
all
pat
right,
on
all
the
right,
back.
all right.
You get a pat on the back. An attaboy. How
I
about we call them the attaboys?
Yeah,
We
we
call
can
them the
call them attaboys.
attaboys.
I mean, I could make up a certificate that I can print out and give them to Curtis that he can hand out to those
I'm
guys.
sure they would put them right up on the wall.
Right. Yeah, they would love it. So yeah, I'll get on that after this podcast.
Hmm.
But
Please do.
let's
You got time now.
yeah, I got plenty of time. So let's kind of start with this article I wrote the other day was I started off giving grades, offense, defense, special teams, and then some individual awards. And I will say this real quick, just me summarizing the season is look, they 9-4. As I wrote about the other day, all the naysayers are going to, have their takes and say, and they already have saying, look, they ran into two ranked teams, they didn't beat them, and that's true. They didn't have to play any of the other top teams in the Big 12 until BYU, and they lost, and that's true. But I don't think it should take it away from the season at all. I think 9-4, you have to look at this team based on the totality of the past few years and not just 2024. And I think what this team did was phenomenal. And it's so funny, Matt, because before this season started, we were talking about, man, what a brutal schedule. I mean, they're the only team, they were the only contender. It was them and BYU were the only other, the only like teams that had to face all the other top 5 teams in the preseason predictions. Well, those teams wound up stinking, so they didn't wind up having a tough schedule. But um, look, not only did they go 9-4, but they manhandled a lot of those teams. It's not like they just escaped against some teams, So I think you look at this season; it was a phenomenal season, and even if they didn't beat a ranked team, even if they didn't win the conference title, things like that, that was a phenomenal season.
They far surpassed most expectations,
Yeah,
including our own,
yeah.
including our own. Now,
I
they
had seven
did.
and five, by the way, to start the year. So yeah, they
Yeah,
were.
yeah, yeah. And I think I think we were the same actually at 7 and 5. But you were
Yeah,
more the 7 to 8 range. I was more the 6 to 7 range,
yeah.
and it all depended upon how they got off and how hot it was of a start.
Hmm.
They did drop that one at Nebraska. If not, they win the conference, right? So, or at least come probably shoots them off into a different direction if they were
Yeah,
able to pull something like that off. The point was is that that Nebraska game ended up being a blessing and a curse for this team, right?
yeah.
Because it was like, you dropped it against your biggest rival, but it was a blessing because it was a wake up call that things needed to be done differently and they needed to diversify their attack offensively and put priorities in some different places, maybe, and kind of raise the intensity level because it just wasn't good enough to that point. And they did, and they really started to reap the rewards of the next few weeks. And we talked about it. That first few weeks, it was a come to Jesus moment. Then
Yeah,
it was okay, proving we should be taken seriously, proving we can be a contender, and then proving that they could win it. And unfortunately, along that path, they stumbled one too many times on the journey. But this is a team, again, that played with house money in a lot of ways, even though they were held to the standard and expectation of top five teams in the country, which
hmm,
is a very strange place to be. And I think part of that was the expectation and the notoriety that they came in with. But also part of that was because people were looking for reasons not to accept them as an elite. And so if you can
hmm.
hold them up to that elite standard while full well knowing they aren't playing with a fully loaded deck here, it's easy to fit into that narrative too. So I think there was a lot of that kind of popped up throughout the year as well. But what we were treated to was a Heisman campaign. And what
Right.
we were treated to was the best season a quarterback has ever registered in Colorado football history. And those two, among some other things, including the biggest surprise of the season, which was the turnaround they made defensively from 23 to 24, at least in my opinion, that became more of their identity by the end of the year. So you had some really dynamic talent and you had a team that was starting to burgeon around them. Unfortunately, there were just a few too many deficiencies at the end of the day. And when it did come time to play some of the better teams on their schedule, they stumbled because there are
Yeah,
levels to this, and it's hard to turn an entire ship around. I always think about a cruise ship, right? Like if you want to stop, it takes you miles to stop in a cruise ship, right? And to turn
yeah,
that thing around, it takes forever to turn that boat around. That's
yeah,
kind of a program. Like it takes a few seasons, and certainly everything is headed in the right direction, but maybe a victim of their own expectation in that, the three most televised games of the year ended up being blowouts, in the opposite direction, which was
yeah,
unfortunate. And so, you know, all that being said, still one of the most memorable seasons in Colorado history. Whether or not it was one of the most successful, that's a little bit of a different story, but one of the most memorable and certainly successful for what it means in the grand scheme of things. So
yeah,
I would say overall, grateful to be a part of that.
yeah. And I agree with you when you say Nebraska was probably a blessing in disguise. I mean, you don't want to lose that game ever to that team, especially the way they played. But I do think that was a wake up call for them. And I remember, and I've referenced this a couple times. But I remember going on a local radio station here in Denver before that next game against CSU, and one of your buddies, DMAC, asked me. He said, "Hey, what does this game mean for CU?" And I said, "The season." And he was like, "Whoa, really?" And I said, "Yes, I really think that this is the season right here. If they lose this game to CSU, it might be a really bad season." And they came out and they played really well against CSU. I think it was 28-9 or something like that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a massive blowout, but they controlled that game. I think that was a major turnaround. And you look at conference play, and you mentioned, yeah, they stumbled against some teams, but really, I think they really only stumbled once against Kansas. I mean, Kansas State, yes, they lost the game, but that was a 31, was it 30, 31-28, or was it a 3-point game? I'm blanking on scores right now, but it was a 3-point game that look, they didn't have Travis the second half of that game. and there was a questionable PI call that no call late in that game that whatever you want to say about it. I
Well, they
mean
were
they were
down four of their top six guys, their receivers,
right,
four of their
right. The
top six
receivers were down,
receivers.
but there was that call late in the game that did, or the no call
Shepard.
against Will Shepard
Yeah.
that I thought was pass interference that gives him a first down. But either way, it's not like they didn't play a poor game. They didn't run
No,
the ball well. They
no.
didn't play a poor game. They played toe to toe with what at the time
Defensively was rough. Maybe one of their worst defensive performances in conference play.
maybe yeah,
Giddens,
but again they went
was
yeah
all
they
over him.
went toe to toe with what we thought was one of the top teams in the conference. And K-State, I mean they won 9 games this year, so they went toe to toe with them. And
Yeah.
really offensively at Kansas, they were fine. They just never had the ball.
Yeah, they
You
were
know,
fine after they got down 17.
yeah, I mean they were yeah when they had the ball they were fine. It's just defensively they were
After they
atrocious.
got down 17.
Yeah,
I
but
just want to
again,
clarify.
I'm just saying, like when you look at what they did offensively in that game,
Yeah.
it's hard to complain when you score 21 points in like 19 minutes. But your defense couldn't get a stop at all. So my point is that this was a really good season, and look, they blew out a lot of teams. This team was getting blown out week in and week out 2 years ago, and for them, frankly, I'm stunned when you look at some of these scores and when they go down to Orlando and they blow out UCF. And say what you want about UCF. At the time, UCF was 3-0. They're hosting Big Noon Kickoff. They're talking about top 25 and things like that, and they were rolling along. And so at that time, that was a massive win. You go down to Texas Tech, which was just coming off of a huge
Yeah.
win at Iowa State and blew them out after falling behind. Cincinnati comes here, and I remember Scott Satterfield talking to local media that week, saying, "Yeah, this is exciting. We have a shot, to be in contention for the Big 12 title." And Cincinnati comes here and CU blows them out, or takes care of them anyway. And Cincinnati didn't win again. And so at the time, these were some games that looked a little bit tougher. Arizona, I know, was a mess, but I still can't believe CU was an underdog going into that game, and they go down to Tucson, blow them out.
Yeah.
Oklahoma State was a mess, blew them out. But um,
Utah.
Utah, and that was a weird game, but wound up blowing them out. So really good game, a really good season for the Buffs this year. I don't think to me there's not a lot to complain about. You can nitpick certain things, and you can say, yeah, they could have done this, they should have done that. And Shador and Coach Prime and Travis, yes, we should have won that game. We should have been there. And yeah, that you could say that, but when you look at the totality and where this program was just 24 months ago, even 12 months ago, and
Yeah.
you say, man, 9-4, and you went to the Alamo Bowl and you did all these things, won the Heisman Trophy, you have all Americans, all these things. Um, just memorable year. And I put it right up there with 2016 as the best seasons I've covered. And frankly, go back to 2001, it's like this season and 2016. And that's about it as far as like memorable seasons for the Buffs. So pretty phenomenal year.
Definitely was. Definitely was. They learned a lot along the way. They changed the way they did things from the beginning of the year,
Yep.
and they represented the university with nothing but class, quite
Yep.
frankly. And they've been excellent stewards of the program for 2 years. After having a couple people in there that it was like taking a dish out of the oven without oven mitts. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what it felt like down the stretch there in 22. And so agreed, there really isn't anything to complain about. Obviously, for their own sake, you wish they would have taken care of business against Kansas State because they would have won the conference.
Right.
So had
Yeah.
that happened, that's kind of that's where I always go back to. And you're probably right in saying the only time they really didn't show up in conference play, right, was Kansas.
Yeah.
That was the tough one. And then
Hmm.
Kansas State, the 3-play 81-yard drive. I'll never forget that. That'll probably stick in my head forever, quite frankly. But so will absolutely shocking the country at UCF, as you brought up, and
Yeah.
hammering Arizona in
Hmm.
Tucson. And then the game that changed the season, quite frankly, was the Baylor game.
Right.
Right, because that
Hmm.
was even before UCF.
Yep.
That was okay. Well, we just beat a really bad CSU team. Now let's see if we can't beat a team who's got a really good defense within our own conference. Turns out the quarterback they ended up starting to go with from that point on turns out to be maybe one of the better quarterbacks than Sawyer Robertson in the
Right.
Big 12. And so it was a classic, right? It was a classic. And they say that lightning doesn't strike twice, right? In the same place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was what it felt like being down there on the field against Kansas State. It was like, oh my goodness, are they about to, snatch victory from the jaws of
Against
defeat
Baylor,
again?
against Baylor.
Oh, I was saying against Kansas State
Oh,
because they
okay,
had already
Kansas State.
done
Yeah,
it
yeah,
against
yeah, yeah,
Baylor
yeah,
because they'd
yeah.
already done it against
Mhm.
Baylor. They shouldn't have beat Baylor,
Right.
right? They were
Yeah.
down. They were down. They
I
were
see what you
out.
mean. You meant a couple weeks later. Yep. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it felt like, oh my God, deja vu again. And then it's like, maybe it
Yeah.
was one too many hands played at the blackjack table. Is kind of what it
Yeah.
felt like in that moment for the football luck. But either way, I mean, some really incredible moments and a lot of plays I'll remember. Certainly a lot involving Travis. But I think what was cool was you had Coach Prime who came in amidst all of the attention and under the spotlight and with the coaching staff to make a lot of the hires. And I know he doesn't like to talk about it like this, but I do. He hired a lot of first timers,
Yeah.
right? At
Hmm.
those positions specifically. They had maybe coached in the NFL or played in the NFL, but at those positions, it doesn't mean it's automatically going to work out, even if
Right.
you've done it in a different place. And it did in a lot of situations. And in a lot of those instances, he made it work and found some really good people as far as staff and coaches to bring into this program. The addition of George Hilo, I think, was really big. And that was one late in the process, kind of like Pat
Yep.
Shermer last year, late in the process, and it ended up paying off really big. So being open-minded but also understanding what your vision is, and maybe there's a little bit of an adjustment that needs to go forward because it's going to be a different vision now. I mean,
Hmm.
the same overarching but different when it gets down to the logistics and the specifics. So I kind of look back on it and say you're relevant, you're elite, and as Coach Prime said, this was the year of reestablishing expectation. This was the year of winning. If Colorado did not win 8 games this year, a lot of people around the country would have poo-pooed the job that Coach Prime has
Right.
done in Boulder. We all
Yeah.
understand that. I think because they got to 8, we don't really consider what could have been. But had they not, a lot of people would have been upset. You and I wouldn't have been, but a
Yeah.
lot of people nationally would have been like, that was a fun story. Was their middling Big 12 team? No,
Right.
they were competing and they finished tied for first in the conference. That's
Right.
nothing to shake a stick at. And now they must be taken seriously.
Yeah. And realistically, they were one win in the regular season away from potentially being in the college football playoff, right? Because you win
Yeah.
one more game, you're in that Big 12 title game, and now ASU just seemed like a team of destiny this year, and maybe they would have lost that game, but um, you get into that game and who knows. So yeah, they were that close. It was a fun ride, and just a season that we'll remember for a long time. And I like the point you made about the coaching staff, because you look at last year's staff, and Coach Prime hired guys uh that you would expect to hire. Charles Kelly
Sean
was a long
Lewis.
Sean Lewis was a long time, offensive coach, and well respected offensive coordinator in the past. I know he was a head coach at Kent State, but well respected OC, young up and coming guy. Charles Kelly, longtime DC with success and national titles. Those are the guys you expect to work, and it worked out better with a first time defensive coordinator and an offensive coordinator that, especially here in Denver, people were like, really? Pat Shermer, and Pat Shermer clicked with Shador better than Sean
Yeah.
Lewis did. And what you can say what you want about the Pat Shermer offense, and you can nitpick that, but he clicked better with Shador, and that's what matters more than anything else with an OC and a quarterback. And Robert Livingston, I mean, you'd have to look around the country. I'm not sure there was a better hire this last offseason than Robert Livingston for the Colorado defense around the country, because he was so good for that defense. And the compliments that these defensive players gave Robert Livingston all season. I was looking at some quotes today, and looking at Cam talking about, I think it was a couple days before the game in San Antonio, where Cam Silman Craig was talking about Livingston and saying, I don't even look at him as a coach. He's like a teammate. And that guy changed my life forever because of the way he came in and handled us. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, these are guys that weren't in these positions before, and Phil Loadholt, had never been an on-field, full-time assistant coach. He'd been an analyst and very young in the coaching profession, and he did a solid job. I know the offensive line was not great, but did a solid job with kind of a piecemeal group, right? And some Warren Sapp had never been coached anywhere and comes in and makes an impact. So yeah, great
Damian
job.
Lewis,
Damian Lewis had been a coach with the Seahawks a little bit, but
but not a
never,
college D line
not a
coach.
college D line coach, and hasn't been coaching super long. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, a lot of his moves worked out. And, you and I have said this before, but if you just listen to Coach Prime, most of the things he says, you go back and watch, say, oh, yeah, that's how it worked out. And so he knows what he's doing. And you can, I thought he did a good job this year, a really good job. And I thought he evolved as a coach as well. And, it turned out to be a really good season. So let's kind of get into some grades, Matt. I want to talk about offensively. Let's start there. And so, we'll start with what I wrote the other day, and then I'll get your take. So, offensively, I gave it a B. Um, they averaged 32.9 points per game, best average for a CU team since 2001. That team averaged 33, so 1/10 of a point more. Obviously, they had the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year in Shador. They had Travis Hunter, LeJounte, Will, Jimmy when he was healthy, all those guys. But for me, the only reason it's not an A is that you're last in the country in rushing again, second year in a row, and they were actually worse this year than last year.
I know.
I didn't realize that, so I went back and looked at the number because last year was so bad. But they averaged 3.7 yards per game more last year than this year, and
Wow.
so to me that's what prevents them from being an A, because as good as your offense was, I think that the lack of a run game cost those games.
Oh,
That's
definitely.
why you lost K-State. That's partially why you lost Kansas, because you couldn't control the ball and Kansas could control it all day. And that's partially why you lost to BYU, because you can't run the ball at all and they just tee off on your quarterback. And so yeah, the lack
Nebraska.
Nebraska too. And I think, to me, I think Nebraska and BYU were sort of similar, and the things just kind of snowballed in those games. But still, the lack of a run game cost you at least, you could at least say one game, and I would say at least cost you the Big 12 title, or the shot at that. It probably cost you 2 to 3 games, right?
I think it cost them the Nebraska, the Kansas, and the BYU game. It didn't cost them the Kansas State game, but it did the other three. I would say three. The fact that the
Yeah,
fact that
but I
the
mean,
fact that there was just
Kansas,
no semblance of being
yeah,
balanced, Brian. There was
Kansas
none.
State though. I mean, they had a program record low. I don't remember the number. It was a
Yeah.
record for it was like minus 27 rushing yards.
So you know what? All four. So you're not
I
wrong.
mean,
You're not wrong.
yeah,
But they could have won it without that. Is kind of what I'm. They probably should have won it
correct,
even without it
correct,
in that night for
correct. Yeah.
specifically.
So yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's why I don't give him an A, but I think it's a B, because it's the most points you've averaged in 23 years, and you have the Offensive Player of the Year, and maybe, well, Scadabo's up there. You probably got two of the three best offensive players in the Big 12 um, on your team. So I give it a B. What'd you give the offense?
Yeah. Are you not using any pluses or minuses here? We not going
Well,
incrementally.
no, I would, but I didn't give a plus or minus on this one. I do on my special teams grade.
Okay. Yeah, I mean it's tough to argue with scoring over 30. It is, and tough to argue with 9. I'd probably go B plus, and that's just because
Okay.
Shador probably makes up for a lot of that.
Yeah,
Definitely not an A. If you're the worst rushing team in the country, that
you can't have an A.
tier does not even
Yeah,
qualify for you, right?
right.
But I will say though, because of what they were able to get out of Shador and out of that offense, considering I still don't think their line was very good. I think
Yeah,
they had a better line. I still don't think it was very good on the whole. And schematically, I think they could have been better in some
yeah,
areas. And I don't love the fact that they decided that the best option these last 2 years was to sit in 10 personnel, even if they felt like as Coach Prime. That would be the one thing that I would say I have disagreed with him on. And Jimmy Crack-Corn, who cares what I think?
yeah,
But more just that I think the variety in formations, the versatility in offensive attack should have been more of a priority the last 2 years, and it just wasn't. And whatever reasons you can decipher on your own, I think it was just more, hey, I'm going to defer to Shador and what he wants to do. It was pretty clear to me on Shador's podcast when he brought up that he knows that the BYU game was going to be his last game in 10 personnel and that it was going to be 11 and 12 in the NFL. He knows what is coming.
Yeah.
and they wanted to play that way, and that's fine. But you can't, again, as we said at the beginning of the year. Actually, you know what, you know, when we said it after the Nebraska game. I remember, because I had to stay behind in Omaha that day to do my radio show in the morning, and I remember telling you, if they don't try to run the football against CSU, Brian, I just don't think they're going to want to do it ever.
Right.
Like, it will never
Hmm.
get easier than it will be in Fort Collins next week, and they sure as hell they did that. But
Yeah.
it was like, you can't then come up there and throw your offensive line under the bus afterwards, or at least shout them out or call them out specifically, if you're going to ask five guys to sit there in passing downs for an entire game when they're overmatched. That's
Yeah.
unfair. And you can't have your cake and eat it too in that regard. And they did change. They did change. They implemented more 11, but it was just like a sprinkle. It was a dash. It was That's why, so we can laud some of those changes, because they did find workarounds. That was my
Yeah.
biggest concern after Nebraska. They There were some areas that they struggled in, that they didn't find workarounds,
Hmm.
and then they started to after that game, and they found some things that worked, but not enough, and then they didn't find the next set of them later in the year. I felt like they got a little too predictable by the end of the season. Just not enough evolution, not enough changing, be it execution, be it
Yeah.
plan, be it scheme. I'm not sure, but I would say B plus, because you still did raise. I mean, when was the last time Colorado's offense averaged that many points? 2020.
Well, 2016 they averaged over 30. I don't remember what it was. It was 31 or something like that. So that was the last time, I think. I mean, 2001 they averaged 33. So this was the best average since 2001. I think 16 is the only other time since then they've averaged 30.
Being able to average that many without a field goal kicker who can kick it past like 47 is also pretty impressive.
Right.
I
Yeah.
just, we should put that out there too. So I feel better about my B plus. But if you're the worst rushing team in the country, you cannot be involved in an A.
Well, and to me, and well, we'll get into Shador here more in a minute. So I'll save that. But I would just say this. I think to average that without that long range field goal kicker, like you said, and with really not a good offensive line,
Yeah,
that's impressive,
it is.
and I know they made some efforts, and you have to applaud them for the efforts they made, and they added a lot of transfer linemen in this last offseason. But I think this last offseason showed that it's tough to find good linemen in the portal, because I think it was nine total. I can't remember if it wound up being eight, because there was that kid from Michigan State that didn't wind up coming here, but it was eight or nine offensive linemen they added through the transfer portal, and you basically had one that was a regular throughout the year.
Hmm.
Well, two, Justin Mayers and Philip Houston.
Yeah.
So two guys were regulars, and Khalil Benson you can throw in there, but Khalil was kind of in and out of the lineup so much, and battled some injuries, that it was really Kareem Harden. I look at it more as the regular than Khalil, and Kareem was a guy that was here last year. So um, all those transfer linemen, and only two worked out, and even Justin Mayers was benched sometimes, and so um,
Oh yeah, for sure.
it's
He didn't play a lot. There were many times he didn't play. He was rotated
right.
out plenty. Yeah.
And he was in that guard rotation, and sometimes
Yeah.
didn't start, sometimes didn't play a lot. And so there was only one. Philip Houston was like the one transfer, and Philip Houston didn't start the first couple games. It
Right.
was Tyler Brown was at right tackle, which I still don't get it. I mean, love Tyler, he's a guard, not a tackle. But once they got Philip Houston in there, they were better there. But he was the one regular, so it showed that it's really tough to find offensive linemen. Um, they better hope they hit better this year. They've added a few guys, but um,
It's not going to be
you
the
know,
same. You don't have Shador back there. I mean, you better
no,
hope that
but
you do hit at a higher rate, and it's not easy. And,
yeah,
and so I mean, that's a hope. That's a hope, and
yeah,
certainly you can develop them as well. The other thing I think offensively was, I didn't love their running back rotation throughout the year. I think it took them way too long to get to
yeah,
Isaiah Augustov.
yep,
I don't know why that was the case. I think it maybe had something to do with practice, but at that point, I mean, you couldn't afford to be that picky. I thought that was a
right,
little short-sighted, but at the same time, they did get there, and maybe, just on their own timing, right? And
yeah,
so, it is what it is. There's definitely stuff that we weren't privy to, but outside of that, they were able to take good things that they did, excuse me, they were able to convert Savell Smalls from a defensive lineman into a guy who could actually play a little bit at tight
Yeah.
end, which not a lot of places would have really thought to do, in my opinion, especially considering their limitations, or at least kept him around for a second year.
Right.
That to me was really necessary. By the end of the year, he became a pretty important part of their offense, unfortunately,
Hmm.
in one way, because you don't really want to have to rely on a guy like that, quite frankly, if we're just gonna keep it real here.
Yeah.
But the truth is that within their limitations, basically not having a tight end, they did pretty well. They did pretty darn well.
Yeah. And it ended up being a good move too because Sam Hart gets hurt. I know Savell beat out Sam for that top spot,
Yeah,
but Sam Hart gets hurt middle of the year, and is out for the rest of the year. He was their one true tight end on the roster because the other one was Morgan Pearson, another defensive guy that was converted that is now in
right.
the transfer portal. So let's move on to defense.
But they aced the receiver room.
Yeah,
They aced that. They got
yeah,
one of everything. They
yep,
crushed it.
yeah,
The vision for the receiver room, in my opinion, you there was the best in the country. In
yeah,
my personal opinion, it was the
right,
best. It was the best producing in the country. It was the most versatile in the country. And certainly when you have Travis, you tip the scales. But to bring in a big body like Will Shepard, who was a significant upgrade over Javon Antonio, right?
yeah,
Significant upgrade over Antonio. LeJounte Wester, I mean, an upgrade over Xavier Weaver, and Xavier Weaver was a hell of a player, a
hmm,
hell of a player. But LeJounte
yeah,
had a better year,
yeah,
okay, and then Jimmy got better. Unfortunately, just didn't play a ton. Omarion looks like he really has something coming in the future. Draylon was an unbelievable find. He's a
yeah,
versatile guy, right? And I'm trying to think of the other guys. Timmons, I would say, kind of up and down. He dealt with injury, didn't have a ton of opportunity, but at the same time, as deep as you could get, and there's other guys that we haven't mentioned, Isaiah Harge and
yeah,
Mathis didn't even see the field. Mathis had to play a lot last year because they needed that
right.
depth. And so,
Cam McKell is a freshman that they love.
yeah,
That didn't he was just injured all year and didn't get a chance to play. So he's going to be good too.
aces in that room.
Yeah,
That's how I wanted to end that. Yeah.
yeah. So defense, you know, it was a dramatic turnaround, Matt. I mean, you look at overall, there's sixth in the Big 12 in scoring defense, 23.1, eighth in total defense, 351.9 yards per game. And as I wrote, those numbers don't really jump off the page unless you compare them to last year. And
Right.
the jumps were
Yeah.
dramatic. And when I looked up this history, I couldn't believe some of the stuff. But last year they gave up 34.8 per game. So the 11.7 point per game improvement is the best for a CU team in nearly 40 years.
Wow.
The 1985 team made a 19-point jump.
Wow.
Um, the yards per game dropped 101.4. And I know, Livingston talks about yards, it's not points. I get that. This is the first time in Colorado history that a defense improved 100 plus yards
Wow.
in year over year. So
Love
it's the
those
best.
numbers.
Honestly, it's arguably the best improvement a CU defense has ever made in the history of this program. Really, the 1985 from 84 was the only comparison I could really find that was close, and that one might have even been better because yeah, you're 19 points better. But Matt, they also led the Big 12 in sacks, led them in tackles for loss, finished second with 27 takeaways, and you have the defensive player of the year in Travis Hunter. And aside from him, you also had BJ Green, who was first team all conference, and Nakai Hill Green, who was widely second team all conference, and Cam Silman Craig, who was snubbed and should have been at least second team all conference. And so overall, I give the defense a B. Uh, the only thing preventing an A is I think an A defense is a top tier defense nationally. They weren't that, but they were so dramatically better than they were last year. I think that was such a big deal for this year's team.
Yeah. And I think defense is looked at just a little differently depending upon the context of the conference and the league that you play in
Yeah,
specifically. And they did enough most days to give them a chance to win. Kansas was bad. Kansas State was bad. And Nebraska's first half was bad.
yeah.
But outside of that, they and I would say probably the North Dakota State game wasn't great either.
I would
But
say,
outs
and real quick, I'll say Nebraska. Even that, you have
they gave
20
up
points,
28 in the
20
first
points in the
half.
first half, but one of them, Shador gets picked off. Wasn't a pick six? Did
Yeah,
he
because he
take it in?
walked.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
he
think he
walked in,
walked
so it's
right
right
in.
there at the
Yeah.
goal line.
Yeah.
So that's not on you. And the last one was it was an interception. I think it was it Bentley or Nakai? They had
I
that
think it was Bentley.
interception. Yeah, I think it was Bentley. Had the interception, so they were that close to making that stop and making it only a 14-point half. So even that one, I would say defensively, the numbers were not bad, and they gave up nothing in the second half. So I just want to add that real quick. So keep going.
Yeah, again, I would just say the first half.
Yeah,
That was all you could really quabble with. But outside
yeah,
of that, maybe maybe you could say the first half against or like the first quarter against Texas Tech.
yeah.
Some of those games
Mhm.
though, some of those and maybe we'll get to some of the overarching takeaways at the end because there was some weird stuff. Like I've never covered a team where you went on the road where not only the opponent but the opponent's fans were so keyed up to beat you at the
Yeah,
beginning of the game. That was a bizarre feeling every time, and at least it was almost exhausting in my opinion at the end of the year by the Kansas game. It's like, oh my God, really again? Like,
yeah,
really you're doing this again?
yeah,
Because they weren't one of the best teams in the country. Because they were them. It was because they were them, not because they were a top 25 team who could change your ranking. You know what I mean? Like it was a little bit different is what it felt like to me. It was because of who they were rather than what they stood for, and that bothered me a little bit by the end of the year. But at the same time, that's football, it's competition, and
yeah.
hey, if they're going to be that keyed up, you better meet them on their level. You know what I mean? So,
And they did
um,
for the most part.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. UCF they did 100%. Nebraska they couldn't because
yeah,
no one's seen anything like that. That
yeah,
was a wild environment.
yeah,
Definitely the best road environment of the year.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
so.
No
Texas
question.
Tech was hokey and gimmicky and
It's the
you
best
know,
road. I mean, honestly, Nebraska was the best road environment I've seen in 10 years of traveling with this team.
oh,
So,
easily. Yeah, that was insane. It was like a rock concert. That's how I
yeah,
would describe it.
right. Yeah.
So yeah, defensively, they made some huge strides and shocked me. I
Mhm.
think on paper, we looked at this team after we saw that open practice in the fall and said, wow, they're D line. They're like 8, 9 guys deep here. That's
Yeah.
crazy. And then they
Mhm.
lost Taurine Carter, and we said, well, maybe that'll hurt them. I don't know. It didn't. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it did because of the contributions he could have potentially made, but
Yeah.
they didn't miss a beat. Amari played great by the end of the year.
They
Shane,
also played most of the year without Rayon Buell, who we
100%.
thought was going to be a key transfer addition as well.
Big time, big time. And you saw the depth of that entire room kind of
Mhm.
come to fruition and just the job that Sapp and Lewis and Dancy did with all those guys, including the edge group, Okunlola, the Hayes injury. He was their biggest, edge recruit, I would say, outside of BJ Green, out of the
Yeah.
portal. And
Hmm.
and it was like, man, the first few weeks he was the only one who got home, and so
Yeah.
you were starting to think that was going to be a massive loss. It didn't really turn out to be because Okunlola stepped up and Tajay McCoy and again Green and Arden Walker was great by the end of the year. Linebacker, they finally solidified those two guys. They didn't have much more than
Yeah.
that, but those
Yeah.
two guys they got,
Yeah.
and they
Yep.
had enough. They had enough, and then Nakai just got paid as I'm sure one of the top players in the portal headed to Bama. I'm sure he got a really nice deal to go to Alabama. And
Well,
then,
I think honestly, not having Nakai was one of the big reasons why they lost that bowl game. I think that was a massive loss.
oh, you could feel it. I mean, there was more
Yeah.
to it than that, but
There was
and
definitely
Nakai
more
didn't
to it,
play
but
offensive line.
I know there was obviously more to it than that. But I think that I'm not sure BYU runs that well if Nakai is playing that game.
Probably not. Probably not. You could definitely feel it.
Yeah.
The other part of it was, I think, secondary wise, I think again you're going to be hard pressed to find a better group in the country. Maybe at least at corner.
Yeah.
They had to have as deep a room at corner as just about anybody with Travis and DJ and Preston and DJ and Colton too.
Yeah.
And then Hard you could factor in, but really those four guys, that's a that's a better four than the four they had in 2016. They had two in 2016, I think so, with Cheeto and Akello. But
Three.
beyond that, who was the
Isaiah was
third?
pretty good. Isaiah
Yeah,
Oliver.
Isaiah Oliver. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. And then who would be the fourth
Well, I don't know who
on
the
that
fourth would
team?
be, but you have to say three.
But my point is, I would say that altogether, I'd
Well,
probably
wait,
take
who
this group over that group,
was
honestly.
Isaiah the other one? Because Cheetah would play the nickel a lot.
Yeah, so it was probably Isaiah
Was it?
and
Was it?
Akello
Okay.
and
All
Akello.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
those two guys are draft picks, but I expect DJ and Travis to both be first round draft picks. So
Yeah.
I expect a higher level, right? Even because Cheeto wasn't even a first rounder, right? He was at like
No,
top of the second.
we thought he would be, but he wound up
Yeah,
being a second round pick, and Akello I think was third or fourth.
yeah. And credit to both those guys; they're still in the league, so
Yeah.
nothing to. We're not saying they were bad players or
And
anything.
Isaiah's still in the league too. you know.
Oh, 100%.
Never,
Yeah.
yeah,
He's been floating around though. I thought he'd have a little bit better of an NFL career than he ended up having.
yeah.
Anyway, the point is that um corner's a hard position to play. You
Hmm.
know, you always see these guys rotate all around the league, especially because teams typically don't want to pay corners that much, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Anyway, the point is that I would take this group over that group personally. I would. I
As
think they're
far as a full
better.
group, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think they're better. And then safeties, you know, Shiloh unfortunately dealt with the injury this year that prevented him from being at his best all season long. But Cam was outstanding, certainly, and then Carter did a great job when he stepped in there. So all things told, yeah, I'd probably go B plus again for the defense. This is probably
Okay,
a B plus team, and
yeah,
finishing 9-4. That's probably right.
yeah, yeah. I can't argue with you on that. I mean, I gave us a straight B on that one, but yeah, I could definitely see a B plus, and maybe a B is too low because of the improvement they made. You know,
That's where
because
I factor it in for me, just because
that's
they
a
were
massive
awful
point of it.
last
Yeah,
year.
they were so bad last year,
Oh,
and to to improve that much, maybe I should have graded on a curve and given that a B plus. But let's move on to special teams, which this was my lowest grade of the three. Um, you know, I'm gonna start with Mark Vassett. Yeah, this is how I started in the article. He was pretty good at times. His average was a little bit lower than last year. A lot of punts inside the 20. He had 19, but he had more last year. I didn't think he finished well. He was not great the last half of the last few games of the season, and pretty inconsistent. You know, he didn't start well. He didn't finish well. I thought he was pretty, really
what did you
solid.
say his average was? Sorry, not to interrupt. What did you say his average
43.7.
compared to last year?
Well, last year I don't have it in front of me, but
Oh, okay.
it was 44 something. So he was about
Okay.
a
Okay.
yard
It was a
less.
little bit down. Okay.
And it's hard to judge punters just on the average because you have to factor in where they punted from. You know, obviously, if you're punting from the other team's 45, you don't want a 55-yard punt. You want a 34-yarder that lands at the 9 or whatever. I don't know the math. I just did in my head, but you know what I mean. So I thought he was inconsistent. Mata didn't start well and obviously missed the long one against BYU. But he did go 12 for 15 and 55 for 55 in extra points. I'm a numbers guy, so I'll get the positives on Mata. He had 10 straight field goals, which ties the school record. If he would have made the one against BYU, he would have set the new record for most consecutive field goals. Um, the 55 extra points are the third, tied for the second most in CU history in a season, and he's the first kicker in CU history to make at least 45 extra points without a miss. So you have to say
Yeah.
positives there. And then real quick return game. LaJonte had the 76-yard punt return against Utah. Outside of that, they got nothing out of the return game. Like
Nothing.
literally, almost literally nothing. And then the kick return units. I mean, look, you can't put the ball in the end zone. CU allowed 53 kickoff returns. The next lowest or the next highest number in the Big 12 was 38. So they're giving up way more kickoff returns. And they were near the bottom in average yards allowed. They gave up a punt return for touchdown in the bowl game. They gave up a kickoff return for touchdown. And all in all, Matt, I gave it a C minus.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Just a step above complete failure
Yeah.
because they didn't get killed as much in the return game as they
Yeah.
probably should have. Like the long ones, they didn't give up too many long ones. They should have given up a lot more than they did. Their coverage unit
Yeah.
probably covered them. And the transition to that little pooch kind of helped them a couple of times when things got
Yeah.
out of control. Now, that being said, they totally failed from last season in recognizing what they had in that room. That was on them. I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, respect to
Yeah.
Alejandro Mata. He's a great young man, but I mean, they didn't make any effort to go get another kicker like that. And they had Feely, but
Mhm.
they gave those guys a shot. But with kicking, it's just such a fickle game. You need a bunch of those guys. And so they were able to make it work, but just a step above failing because
Yeah.
you couldn't kickoffs were embarrassing for the
Mhm.
second consecutive year. You were in so many situations offensively, at least 5 to 10 this year, where you went for it on fourth down in a situation you would have never gone for it because you were in between a rock and a hard place where you either
Yeah.
take the delay game and punt, which you're just trading, a couple yards of field position, or you're going for it on 4th and long. And there was like once or twice it really worked out, but most of the times it didn't. And
Yep.
and that is a
Mhm.
direct result of not having that trust in that leg. And it was the resource they had, but they failed in recognizing that last year and not fixing it, because it wasn't like in 2023 that Jace really gave us any confidence that he was going to be that guy anyway. I
Yeah.
was really surprised after last season that they didn't have a plan. And now they do. And Coach Prime, that was one of his top priorities. You could tell throughout the season,
Yeah.
just completely unacceptable. It finally got to him too.
Well,
It's
that
like,
was one of the
what?
first transfer commits was the kicker from Louisiana Tech, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but
Yeah.
he's put everything in the end zone.
I was gonna say if he does that in Boulder, then we'll learn his name.
Well, I mean, look, he's doing that at Louisiana Tech, so he's doing that at
Yeah,
sea
no, I
level.
know, I know,
He's
I
going
know.
to put it into,
Good. I hope
if
he
you
kicks it out of Folsom Field.
if
Honest
you
to
have
God.
if you have seats
Yeah.
behind the end zone, you might get souvenirs next year because he's going to put
Opening
them through there.
kickoff, opening kickoff. I would just say next season at home, as far as you possibly can. This is
Right.
for the last 2 years.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
boot it. So anyway, yeah, it was just a step above failing, unfortunately. Good to see Lejante get that one at the end of the year, but definitely disappointing in terms of what we maybe expected from their return game. Although, all you can really do is in the punt return game. I
Yeah.
mean, you're not really, especially at altitude, you're not really going to end up with too many kick returns anymore. So
Yeah. Unless you
it is what
play
it is.
CU.
That is true, Brian.
Yeah.
Unless you play CU.
Yeah. And I will say too, I mean, on the returns, they gave up too many. I mean, there's only one touchdown on the kickoff returns, but they gave up several like 30, 35-yard returns that wound up being short fields that
Yeah.
opponents would take advantage of. But overall, I think to your
Mm,
point, it could have been worse. And I
yeah.
think you have to give some credit to guys like Ben Fennesith and Brendan Gant. Guys like that played really well on the coverage units overall. There was just a few of those that broke. And it's hard for me to blame the coverage unit when you're having to cover way more than your opponents ever cover. I mean, they had to cover more than any return unit in the country, probably.
Yeah, you can just tell they desperately need an overhaul. They need to figure out the special team
Yeah.
situation was a hodgepodge this year
Hmm.
because of the departure of one of their assistants at the beginning of the year who was more or less responsible for some of that. And
Yeah.
so now you got to think about that. I would imagine that's probably one new hire that's made. That would be my guess. I know Tommy
Yeah.
Robinson was doing some of that by the end of the year. Maybe Coach Prime continues to have him in that role, but by the end of the year they got flat out embarrassed by BYU in the special teams game. You can't
Hmm.
allow that anymore. It's
Yeah.
clear that they weren't out coaching anybody with that unit. And the other two things I'll mention, I'm glad you brought up Vassett. He was better in 23 than he was this year for sure.
Yeah.
He definitely regressed a little bit. And I love Mark. Mark is just an awesome guy. I think invaluable to have around the team. I
Yep.
personally love having one of those close to 30-year-olds around the team that's actually one of the players, just because that's a perspective that's different, and that's an older guy in the locker room that's different. And Stefano was like that, or Stefano,
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Right.
He was a great guy, and I loved having him around too. So that was part of it. Mata did make the one against Cincinnati at the end of the game to seal it, which was my favorite special teams moment of the year.
Yeah.
Even more so than the kick return. That was their best special teams moment, because that was a kick that mattered from, what was it, 47? And he
Might have been. Yeah.
it wouldn't
Mhm.
have been good from 48 and a half, but he got it from 47,
Right.
and that was a big one. So, I imagine that he'll probably do the lion's share of the field goal kicking next year, maybe short of the long ones, although I would just completely open that competition up. No one, as far as I'm concerned, should enter 2025 feeling
Yeah.
confident in their job special teams wise.
Well, maybe except for Mata, but because he's Prime's guy, and Buck Buchanan is the guy from Louisiana Tech. But honestly, I think Mata should feel safe because I think that what they'll probably end up doing, Matt, and I don't mind this because Mata's money inside 45. But
How many guys aren't, Brian? That's kind of what I'm
uh,
saying. Like, we're kind of playing
I get
feelings
it.
game and not football here. I
I
like I
get it.
respect that, and I like Alejandro and his family. I think they're wonderful people. But if Buck Buchanan can come in and out kick him, he should be the kicker next year. That's just
Yeah,
my personal
maybe
opinion.
so. But I mean, I still think you could work it to where, and this is, I think, what they were trying to get with Feely, but it hasn't worked out. But you could have a situation where it's Mata handles extra points and
Sure.
anything inside 45, and Buchanan, he's got a leg. You do kickoffs and anything beyond 45. or 47, not as long as 47,
Put
then
Mata at like 40.
yeah, and maybe do that. But I think it's probably a better duo than what you've had, and so I don't mind that. But anyway, let's move on to some individual awards, and we'll talk more about special teams as we go along. But uh, I'm gonna start again, go on my list here from the article. Player of the year, there's no question. I changed it from last year because last year I did MVP, and if I was calling it an MVP this year, I would probably go Shador because I still think he was the most valuable player on this team. That if you had lost him, this thing falls off the rails. I think as great as Travis is, if you lose him, you've still got other good receivers and you still got some other corners. So I changed the player of the year because it's absolutely Travis. And, you
Right.
know, I don't even know if we need to discuss it because he's the Heisman Trophy winner. He's the Walter Camp Player of the Year. He's the AP Player of the Year, Blitnikoff Award winner, Bednarik, Lot Impact Trophy. You know, all the things we've said about Travis, he's just phenomenal.
One thing about him that I think, just trying to think over the last week and appreciating the little details about him, because that's what I've started to do. Just
Yeah.
the little stuff that he did. The fact he did get better from last year to this year. He got faster,
Yeah.
he got stronger athletically, he was a better player. And I think as an offensive player, he became a better player too this year as well. And clearly, the fact that he got hurt last year was a big part of it. And with the spleen, I understand that. But there weren't really any bad moments when he was healthy. Like last year, the Io Manor game, that was a tough one. Even though it was at
Yeah.
the end of an overtime game, 160 snaps,
Hmm.
insane to even think about that. That is still a moment where he got beat. Like that
Right.
is
Hmm.
an image that sticks out. There are zero image. The only image is when Isaac Wilson on the first play of the second half just decided to throw it up for Singer to the back pylon, said, "Here, go get it." And he
Right.
got him. And he got him. And he got him one time. But there wasn't, you know,
That was the
in a
one good
blowout.
throw Isaac Wilson had the entire day.
Right, in a
It
blowout.
was a
But my
phenomenal throw, but
Right.
it was the
And
one he
and that's
had.
like one compared to, and then McMillan got him a couple of times, I think last year. But the point
Yeah.
was is that we're talking about his standard compared to everybody else is just, I mean, it's not even, it's Mount
Yeah.
Olympus and the rest of us peasants down here,
Right.
living among the commoners. But it was just that there weren't any bad moments when he was healthy,
Yeah.
and it's not like there weren't bad moments. He was just strictly dominant whenever
Yeah.
he was on the field, dominant. I remember that Arizona game, there were two touchdowns. Had he been healthy, he would have had. He probably should have had two more touchdowns if he were healthy against
Yeah.
Arizona in that
Mhm.
first half. So, not much else to say other than, ooh, that's going to be the one guy that you'll go back and watch highlight videos of
Yeah. Yeah.
over and
Right.
over and over. And it hit me actually yesterday morning. I was just something popped up on my feed, and I just went, "Wow, okay, you'll never be able to flash that bat signal in the air again, and Batman's never gonna, show up again because
Yeah.
it's just over now." So, just very grateful to have watched his journey, and I have probably in probably in every sport, Brian, as far as like the most jaw drop moments in person, he probably has registered more of those for me than any athlete I've ever been around.
Yeah. I mean, the best football player I've covered at CU before Travis was LaVisca, and he provided
Yeah.
quite a few of those moments offensively, but obviously didn't play defense. But um, yeah, my one disappointment for Travis this year was that he wasn't healthy for those couple games in a row where he sat out the second half against Kansas State because he got injured. I think they win that game if he's healthy.
Yep.
And then because of that, banged up the next week. I believe it was the very next week against Arizona, where he didn't really play defense. And I would have loved to have seen him go against McMillan again because McMillan did get him for the touchdown in 23. I would have loved to have seen that matchup. We didn't get to see it. And, there was that deep pass that, you're referencing that Travis probably would have caught if he was healthy. That's my one disappointment. But I will say another big step Travis took this year was being healthy.
Mm.
His previous 2 years at college, for various reasons, he did not play full seasons. He was banged up his 1 year at Jackson State, and I think it was 9 or 8 games he played. It was limited to 9 games last year, and he got to play all 13 this year, and was basically healthy for all but about two halves, right?
Hmm.
For about the he didn't even play the second half against Arizona, um, but he was healthy this year, and we got to see his full potential. And man, was he awesome! And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, he I don't know which interception of his is my favorite. Probably TCU
It has to be.
last year.
Has to be.
But the one against UCF would probably be my second favorite that he's had,
Agreed.
and just,
And then he ran right down to us, right down in the corner of that end zone, did
yeah,
the Heisman. That was his first
yeah,
Heisman. I'll never forget that in my life.
yeah. And, the play he made at the end of the Baylor game to win that game, to seal that one defensively. I mean, those were three of his best moments. And then
The
offensively,
North
it's just,
Dakota State catch,
yeah,
the Oklahoma State catch,
right,
the Utah catch. I don't
right.
know what else to say. The guy's a
So,
freak.
yeah, he was just, and I guess I love the passion of college sports fans. Um, the Boise State fans were annoying in December with the way they would disparage Travis. I didn't like that because I didn't see that messaging wasn't coming out of CU towards Ashton Genty. It was, he's phenomenal, but we think our
And
guy is better.
eventually, they got it out of us. Eventually,
Well, but that didn't come out of CU.
no, no, never,
Whereas,
never,
you
never.
saw it from, like, there was that dig
The fans.
from Danielson too, where he was like, "Well, if you're one of the best players, you're playing in a conference title game." It's like, come on, man. If CU's
Danielson's
if
might be the
CU's in
most
the Mountain West, I guarantee you they're in that conference title game.
Daniels, just so you know, Danielson for me is like a step below Lanning. And I might even dislike him more on a personal level. I just think he's like the
Well,
most tightly wound guy I've ever seen. And he's, I don't know, not a fan. Not a
yeah,
fan.
and we don't need to get into the Heisman discussion because it's long over. But
Oh no, we're not
it
talking about
was
that.
he was just to your point earlier in this podcast. I mean, it's hard to find something bad about Travis, and those that find the bad things about Travis are, I don't think they're watching, or they're just passionate fans for their own guy,
And they're
and
reaching.
they're reaching. And look, if you're a Boise State fan and you're passionate about Ashton Genty, great, love you for it. But if you just, I promise you, everybody from other teams that were putting down Travis Hunter would have traded somebody on their team for Travis Hunter in a second, and they would have loved to have had him. So, yeah,
The
long
dumbest
discussion.
comment of that, and I got to shout out Brock Heward on that, was when he went in the Mountain West Championship game and asked and said, "What did he say? If every coach could pick their Heisman, Ashton Genty would wind up number one on every ballot," which is the most
Yeah,
out of pocket thing to say in the
if
world.
the voting was only coaches.
If you
Yeah,
if you offered coaches one player in the country, it would almost be unanimous. It would
yeah,
almost be unanimous. Every conference, every coach.
yeah.
Travis Hunter would be one or two on their list, and if they were two, you were probably not a good coach. I don't
Right,
know what to say.
right. Yeah. If
So
you were two, your name was Spencer Danielson.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
I remember watching that game live, and I'm thinking when he said that, I'm like,
Oh,
dude,
shut up,
really?
Brock. Yeah, I know.
Come on, Brock,
I
you're
know.
smarter than that.
He had been around CU all year too. For him to say something that dumb was a total caught in the moment thing. And I
Yeah,
texted him after that. I was like, "You gotta be kidding me."
yeah,
I called him out on social media for that. That was stupid.
yeah, that was
Anyway, go
dumb.
ahead. Yeah,
Let's move on. Top offensive player, Shador Sanders to me. Yeah, again, it goes back to Travis Hunter obviously is the player of the year, but this offense was led by Shador, and
yeah.
he was the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He's the Unitas Award winner, for the Golden Arm Award winner. Just phenomenal. And again, numbers wise, Matt, because I do that. Best season ever for CU quarterback. Single season school record for passing yards, 4134.
Hmm.
Keep in mind that the previous record was like 3,500.
Yeah.
Um, Passing touchdowns, 37. The previous record was 28. Okay. Completion percentage, 74%. He's the first quarterback in CU history to complete 70% of his passes. He's at 74. Passer rating 168. I think the previous record was Shador last year at like 150 something. Um, Nationally led the country in completion percentage, second in TD passes, fourth in passing yards, and fifth in rating. I mean, he's phenomenal. And I also have honorable mention. I didn't do honorable mention on player of the year because it was obvious. I did honorable mention on all these others. I got honorable mention Hunter and then LeJontay Wester. But let me get your thoughts on offensive player of the year for the Buffs.
Yeah, Shador was clearly the straw that stirs the drink. He's the
Yep.
system. It was all him. He's, you know, for all intents and purposes, the offensive coordinator, at least
Yep.
on the field. Pat may have designed the system, but it was Shador who was calling the shots from a down to down basis, him and Travis. With Pat's help, I'm not saying that he wasn't involved and that was all them, but I would say that the trust that was given to Shador is the most trust I've ever seen a coaching staff give to a college player, any sport.
Yeah.
any sport, and that's impressive. Okay, because he
And second on that list is probably the trust they gave Hunter.
oh, easily,
Yeah.
easily. And you don't do that in college because these are kids. You can't
Yeah.
trust them. They're not intelligent enough yet. They're not smart enough yet. They haven't seen enough yet. These two have. These two have, and obviously being the family business that it is, and having done this and having developed that trust over having been in those situations time and time and time again, that played a lot into why
Yeah.
there was so much trust allotted to those guys. But it's true. And I don't think we'll ever see that again from that unique perspective.
Mhm.
Those guys called a lot of shots, a lot of shots. And typically you want your best players to have input. Those guys were shot callers, which
Yeah.
you have to give that coaching staff. Pat Shermer is a 25-year NFL coach, a former head coach. For
Mhm.
him to put his reputation in the hands of, a 21-year-old, 22-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid, that's not an easy thing to do. That's not an
Yeah.
easy thing to just, trust that person to do, even if they are a good quarterback, because at the end of the day, that's your name. And if you put your name on something, you take pride in it. And so, especially a guy like him in his position, that blew me away. That blew me
Yeah.
away. And while I would say that sure there are some things that I wish Shador could have done a little bit differently this year, I he was sensational. Time after time after time, the last two seasons, to get sacked almost 100 times,
Yeah.
to really continue to trust your protection more than most. Most guys would have just started seeing ghosts and started paying attention to the rush instead of keeping their eyes downfield. Shador took hit after hit after hit and was still honoring the play, sometimes to his detriment, where it took the play too long to develop and he should have bailed on it and gone to a quicker option, or the scheme wasn't, appropriate for that fit, but he found a way to make it work, or, play broke down, but he spun out of something. And there were plenty of times he spun into him too. That
Yeah.
being said, his commitment to pushing the ball down the field. When you turned on college football every Saturday the last 2 years, one guy was more willing to do that than everybody else I watched. And the
Yeah.
only reason why he didn't maybe do that as much this year is because for them to be better offensively, he couldn't do that as much.
Yeah.
They had to
Yeah.
get the ball out faster because they could not run the football. Had they been able to run the ball, and had they been able to utilize legitimate play action and had him buy into it, that's going to be one of his biggest hurdles at the next level, is buying into play action and what it really means to run the football. I think he
Yeah.
gets it, but there's a whole different level to it because it'll make him better. It'll make him
Mhm.
better. And there were many scenarios this year where I thought it would have done the same, but just his accuracy, some of the throws he was willing to, he could make every throw on the football field, standing in the center, opposite hash to the opposite sideline on a rope on a 15-yard out. That's my
Yeah.
biggest test of a college quarterback. Can you make that throw time and time again? And if you can, then I think you can do the job, because that is the hardest throw to make in the book.
Yeah.
So all things told, Brian, he was really good. And the only time he didn't come through this year was at the end of the Kansas State game. That was the only time.
BYU.
Yeah, but no, I mean with like the game in the balance. I meant
Okay.
like
Yeah.
that's what I meant. Like at the end of the
Yeah.
game, he had the ball,
Yeah.
down three with a shot to do something. He was without
Yeah.
four of his top six receivers, and maybe
Hmm.
like you brought up, could have made the argument that Shepard probably could have drawn the PI there. But
Yeah.
the only time he didn't come through this year, when the game was within reach in a blowout, I don't really consider that.
Right. You're right.
It
Yeah.
is those, some of those happen
Yeah.
at this level. But that was the only time. And if that's the only time really in 2 years with the ball in his hand that he really struggled and failed to come through, I think that's pretty darn good too.
Yeah. Let's move on. Defensive player of the year. Uh, so I'm spreading the wealth because to me, Hunter's the CU's best defender. Do we agree on
Mhm.
that? Okay.
Yes.
So, but I gave the award to Cam Stillman Craig because I wanted to spread it around a little bit. Um, and I wanted to highlight Cam because he was phenomenal this year. And um, you know, 93 tackles, led the team, most by a CU defensive back in 15 years. Chappelle Brown was the last one to have
Wow.
as many tackles. He had 10 tackles for loss. That's the most since Cheeto Awuzie in 2015 had like 13, I think. And returned a fumble for a touchdown, capped his career with an interception in the Alamo Bowl. Um, Again, it's Hunter. I think he's the best defender. I'm giving it to Cam Stillman Craig because I think he was so impactful on the defense. And my honorable mentions would be, Hunter and then BJ Green.
Hunter and BJ Green. I'd put Nakai Green instead of BJ. I'd probably go with that whole front seven unit, and
Yeah,
probably highlight all of them. BJ came on at the end of the year. He had a couple of games with multiple sacks. I think
yeah,
the more impactful player all year was Nakai, so I'd probably go with Cam and Nakai after that.
okay, yeah,
But Cam did bring up the point, and it was late in the season. I can't remember exactly when he said it. Maybe it was after the Oklahoma State game that he said that he didn't feel like he played well at Kansas, and so it was really he put the onus on himself to come out and play better because he felt like that translated. When he played well, the team played well. And I
yeah,
think that turned out to be true. He was great for being a guy that I did not expect to have that type of season heading into this year. He was not a headliner for me. I
hmm,
wasn't sure that he was even going to start, quite frankly. Even though he played well at the end of the year, and I know he's one of Coach Prime's guys, being an undersized guy, you wouldn't be surprised if a coach went to try and find more of a prototypical option, but
yeah,
he's got that dog in him, right? And he turned out what surprised me most about him is maybe less about his play on the field, but more about who he was as a person. And maybe that was just a lack of me knowing him.
yeah,
But his speeches to the team were the most passionate all year. He was it was it was not hard to tell where he was putting in his work, right?
yeah,
Every day. It was on the field. And he's a really good dude. Really good dude.
yeah,
Definitely gonna miss him. And Nakai stepping in and being that run stuffer the way he was really kind of took some of the pressure off of Bentley from having to be that guy every single game. And
right.
I don't know that he was, quite frankly. I think Levante can do some things. I don't think he's the player that Nakai was, even though I think he had a good year. So
Nakai made Bentley better.
yes, and not the other
Mhm.
way around.
Yeah,
And not the other way around. And that's the in my opinion at least. And
and I
so
and I love Bentley, but I think that Nakai was the bigger impactful linebacker.
no doubt, no doubt
Yeah,
about it. So that's who I would say.
yeah. No, no arguments there. Special teams player of the year. Again, what we talked about, the special teams was not great. I give it to Mata because,
Yeah.
um,
You
he
have
did
to.
hit most of his field goals. Again, 55 for 55. We don't see that often. It's like I said, it's the most makes without a miss in CU history on the extra points. I know it's just extra points, but still, it's he had one of the highest scoring seasons by a kicker in CU history, so you got to give him credit for that. And now part of it is that the offense scored a ton,
I was gonna
and
say he's
they're
more
in
of a
the end zone a
passenger
lot.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 You're kicking extra points because your offense got in the end zone, and
Yeah.
so it's Mata, and then honorable mention for me. Um, it was tough to find, but I went Ben Finneseth because I thought he was phenomenal in coverage most of the year, and then for lack of other options, I went Mark Vassett. But any comments on special teams player of the year?
No.
Okay, moving on. All
Yeah.
right. Top transfer. I'm going LeJontay Wester, coming in from FAU. Obviously, phenomenal year last year. Was one of the top receivers in the country. Didn't have the same numbers, but man, he was phenomenal for the Buffs and overshadowed by Hunter. I think he didn't get enough all conference love because he was CU's number two behind Travis Hunter, but really one of the best seasons a CU receivers ever had. 74 catches, 931 yards, 10 touchdowns. Also has a punt return for touchdown. To me, he was the top transfer, and my honorable mentions were BJ Green and Nakai Hill Green.
Did LeJontay drop a ball this year?
I don't
I can't
remember
even
one.
think of many, if
I can't think
any.
of one. Yeah,
He was sure-handed as it gets. There were three, probably four transfers that rose above everyone else. LeJontay being one of them, Nakai being the other one, and then DJ McKinney is on that list for me.
yeah,
And
yeah.
stats wise, it's not going to pop off the page, but Travis Hunter doesn't have the year he has without DJ McKinney either.
Right.
Because having that guy on the other side of the field allows you the freedom to do some of that other stuff. And
Mhm.
then Hood stepped up and Preston, certainly they both played really well. And I hope that Preston comes back. I think that might be an option for him. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that
Yeah.
would be like found gold if you could do that for next year just because the JUCO ruling. For those who
Right.
don't
Right. Right.
understand why I would say that, but I would say either DJ or Lejante for me. Even Nakai, even though Nakai was great, it's tough for me to want to give it to Lejante over the defense because it was so necessary on the defense.
Yeah.
As good as Lejante was, I'd probably have to lean with DJ and Nakai, and then
Okay.
BJ and the rest of the crew would be there. But for me, I think those two guys really solidified a lot and changed the way that they could play defense. I
The other
struggle
one.
to think about what they would be in man coverage without some of
Yeah.
those guys.
The other one I had a hard time leaving off the list, and I would say more than DJ because I think that because I have such respect for Colton Hood, I think Colton Hood could have done a good job too. But Chidozie has to be mentioned as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure,
Chidozie
for
was
sure.
phenomenal,
Yeah,
and got better towards the end of the year. So, um,
yeah, definitely good point.
look,
They missed a couple games and they missed him badly too.
yes, early in the year,
Yeah.
and but man, the BYU game, he was actually really good too. So he was phenomenal. Yeah, and look, Will Shepard deserves a little bit of credit too, and he was their number three receiver most of the year, and he came in really was kind of their four, but Jimmy was hurt so much. But you got to
Will
give
had a bit of a disappointing year to me. He stepped up it later in the year, but he had some pretty big drops too this season. He
early
had
in the
some
year, yes,
Yeah,
I,
he had some okay
yeah,
catch. He had some big catches for sure and had a couple of big games, but I think the
yeah.
impact that the others brought to the game was more
I
significant.
think from UCF on though, he was pretty solid, and I think you got to give Coach Prime and his staff credit because they hit on some transfers more so than they did last year with some
Oh
big
yeah.
time impactful transfers. So, um, those are my guys
Better
there.
caliber player, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And top freshman, Jordan Seaton, I think to me is probably the obvious one.
Yeah.
Highest offensive line recruit coming out of high school, obviously, and he was their best and most steady offensive lineman. I think he was the only well, no, he was the only player that played that started and played all 13 games at the same spot for the Buffs offensive line. So, and I think he played the most snaps of anybody on offense. Maybe Shador probably played more, but I think he played he's top two for snaps. And then honorable mention for me, Draylon Miller and Colton
Mhm.
Hood, who's
Yeah.
a redshirt freshman, but still a freshman.
Yeah, the Seaton. I mean, for him
Yeah,
to step in with the expectation, never really have bad games, maybe a couple of tricky moments. We knew that was going
yeah,
to happen.
yep,
And even if he were to have had bad games, that's what kind of part of playing offensive line is about, right? You
yeah,
know, the ups and the downs. And so the other part of it is his health. He was able, as you brought up, able to stay on the
hmm
field. Had they
yep,
lost him, they would have been in a world of hurt this year.
yeah,
I kept thinking to myself, if there's one guy outside of the, usual suspects that you cannot have get hurt, honestly, Seaton might have been number two to Shador,
right,
even more
yeah,
so than Travis. So for me, yeah, he's definitely far and away, and cool to see what the role Draylon Miller carved out for himself at the end of the year was going to be, because he
yeah.
started as more of that versatile guy, and then he ended up actually having some really big games as a wide receiver, which is encouraging moving forward because they're going to need some outside guys.
Yeah. The only left tackle I remember playing, dominant. Like I knew Seaton was going to have some bumps because he's a freshman, because that's just what happens with freshmen. But Penei Sewell, when he was at Oregon,
Yeah,
was
he was
was
good.
probably the the best true
Yeah.
freshman lineman I've ever seen. So to put Seaton in that category would have been unfair. He wasn't quite that good, but he was really good. I think he's certainly on track to be a first round pick, and really good freshman year. So most improved player on the team. And I'm gonna let you go first on this one.
It's a good question. Most improved player on the team.
Yep.
I think,
And we're sticking with guys that were on the team last year
yeah.
that
Cam is on that
mhm,
list for me. Travis is on that list for me because I think he did make a huge jump. I mean, he
okay.
wouldn't get most improved, but if you're gonna just ask me who were the guys that made the biggest leaps, as good as Travis was last year,
Yeah.
athletically, he came to play at a whole different level this year.
Yeah.
Um, Cam would be there. Let's see. I mean, I think a lot of people would maybe want to point to Amari McNeil, but I thought he ended the year really strong last year. So maybe you could point there.
I was gonna put McNeil on my honorable mention list, and then I looked at last year. He actually had more TFLs and sacks last year than this year.
I'm trying to tell you, at the end of last season, I thought he was about to bust
Yeah.
out onto the scene this year, and then he just kind of
I
got
thought he had
lost
a
in the
really
shuffle.
good middle of this year and then kind of
Well, he got
tailed
hurt at
off.
the end of
Well,
the
he
year
got hurt.
too.
He got hurt too, but like,
Yeah, he got hurt.
yeah.
But he
But
was a guy that I expected more from. I also expected more from Shane Cokes. I thought he was due to make a bigger jump. He just never became like that nasty D
yeah,
lineman, I think, that Coach Prime wanted him to be. And Shane's a great guy, and I think he'll play at the next level because he's a big dude. He's hard to
yeah,
move, and he gets double teamed all the time. But there's like another step for him to go in his process that I was a little surprised Lewis and Sapp weren't able to get out of him. I thought they'd have
Yeah,
been able to get that out of him.
right.
I don't know. I don't know. That would be a tough one for me to plant my flag and go, this guy assuredly.
Well, I did plant my flag. I went with Cam.
Yeah.
I thought Cam was the way I wrote it. I thought he was good last year. He was great this year,
Yeah.
and I think that he this year, and you mentioned it, like he was. They were better when he was good,
Yeah.
right? And that was not. He was not that impactful last year. Like he made plays, but he did not kind of.
Maybe
He
Arden
wasn't the,
Walker.
he wasn't the straw
Yeah.
last year. And for me, honorable mention was Arden Walker and Carter Stoutmeyer.
Well, there you go. Yeah, Arden would be on that list. I'd actually probably pick Arden. I would probably
Okay,
pick Arden because I mean he was one of their starting ends by the end of the year.
yeah,
That's a huge step for him. And so
yeah,
I would probably say between Cam and Arden.
yeah. And I thought Carter, just he looked good. He had some good flashes as a freshman last year when he got to play.
Yeah.
This year he became impactful and was that guy that, especially when you lost Preston Hodge towards the end of the year. I thought you didn't lose a beat when Shiloh was out for a
He
few
was
games.
great when Shiloh
He
was
was
out.
phenomenal, and so I think Carter Stoutmeyer made that leap as well. And then the last award I have here, and we can wrap up with this, was best interview, and I went. This is the only one I give it to two guys. And I went with Shador and I went with Stillman Craig because I think both those guys, they're both really good to talk to. But I think, and part of it is that they're put in this position, right? Coach Prime leans on them, those two guys more than anybody else, when they lose or in tough times. Those are the two guys because Coach Prime picks who goes to the podium, and those are the guys he leans on. And I thought every time they sat in front of the microphone, they were phenomenal with us, and very open and honest and things like that. And so I go with those guys. And I've got a couple honorable mentions too, but I want to see who you would go with.
That's a tough one because this is where we get to the stage that we're at where we're thinking about these human beings and not being
Yeah,
able to be around some of these guys anymore, which sucks
right.
because there's some really, really good guys on this team. And even giving this one out feels wrong to me because there's so many that I feel like could fall into that category. I thought Seaton was fantastic with us this year.
He's one of
Shador,
my honorable mentions. Yeah.
Shador and Cam were obviously who they are, so tough to go against either one. Shout out Shiloh. He was always great with the media.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Always. I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoy talking to Shiloh all the time. Um, let's see. BJ Green, maybe a little bit quieter, but I wouldn't probably put him in that category. I'd probably say those would be the guys. Those four would stand out for me over everybody else. Would be Shador, Shiloh. It would be Cam, and who else? Ed Seaton.
Yeah,
That would be
my two
those
honorable
four.
mentions were Seaton and LeJonte. I thought
And Tyler
LeJonte
Brown.
was really good. Yeah, Tyler Brown. I will say this about BJ. I talked to him at Media Day, the local Media Day back in August, and he's very quiet. He hadn't really done. I'm not sure he'd done any media, but talking to him, he was telling me he doesn't love doing that stuff, and he was such a good interview. I told him at the end, I was like, I hope you do more media because you're really good at it. And he goes, oh, well, thank you. And every time
Mhm.
he got in front of us, he was really good
Oh,
and
he's
really
extremely
insightful. He's a
intelligent.
smart young man. And, he gave us really insightful answers. He was really good. And so I really enjoyed talking to him. He was one of the guys that I know well, I don't want to bring up a sore subject, but you missed that day because of a schedule mishap in San Antonio when they
Oh,
had the schedule wrong,
yeah.
the post practice. But
I
BJ
got
talked
to
to
go to
us.
the beach. It's okay. You
I
got
know, I
BJ
know, I
Green.
know,
I got the
I
beach.
know,
It's
I know.
okay.
But he was really good that day too. So, but yeah, there's so many guys. I mean, and it's hard to argue Shiloh because every time we talked to him, he was great. We got him at Big 12 Media Day, and we don't get one-on-ones with guys very often. But he was great at Big 12 Media Day, and
DJ
this is
McKinney
one.
was also good too.
DJ
I like
McKinney was
DJ.
good, and
Yeah.
Draylon Miller for a freshman is really good as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys that were pretty good interviews, and you know Shane Cokes when he would talk to us is really good, and
Yeah.
so yeah, you can go on and on. Probably
Bentley.
the Bentley is way better than he was last year too. He might be one of the most improved interviews because I think he was a little bit more comfortable this year, maybe around us. But he was this year. I thought he was a better, more comfortable interview than he was last year, and so yeah, there's quite a few of those guys that were pretty good, and um, yeah, I'm gonna miss a lot of these guys. We didn't get to know them as well as teams in the past, but
Right.
you're gonna miss a lot of these guys because they were good players, but also good human beings. And for all the bad stuff that people try to bring up about this program, there's so many people nationally that are missing out on the
Yeah, some
quality
really
human
good
beings
stories.
that Coach Brown's brought in here. And 2 years in, this would be an extremely well, we wouldn't be doing a podcast if we tried to talk about the off the field issues this team's had, because there's really nothing to talk about, right?
Yeah.
And they've brought in some really good human beings and really good young men that I know I'm going to root for as they go on to whether it's the NFL or life, whatever it is. And so, not to get sappy and emotional here, but I mean, this really good young men that I was, even if it was just one conversation or two, it was fun to meet those guys and get a chance to talk to them and you know just a lot of fun. It was such a memorable era because of a lot of those guys.
Yeah, and I brought this up after the Alamo Bowl, because of some of these media members that are
Yeah,
let into some of these environments. There was a gentleman who thanked them in the press conference for their contributions at the Alamo Dome. And obviously, that's unprofessional and not the right time to do it. However, I brought up in my video, I think everybody who's been around the program, especially as long as guys like you and I have, and that person had been around the program like a cup of tea.
yeah,
I think we would all like the opportunity to thank them for their contributions to not only CU but the community, because they have changed the outlook in the city right now, and
yeah,
that's pretty cool. So definitely very grateful, and we'll remember these 2 years, forever. There's no doubt about that, and even the bumps and the bruises along the way, and the whirlwind that was September 2023 and what came with that, and then kind of earning that back along the way to a
yeah,
degree, maybe not that degree. I mean, for them to have put up three of the top 10 most watched games last year is insane.
yeah,
Looking at where the numbers kind of fell back to this year, that's pretty wild, Brian. Like, if
yeah,
you really think about it, doing what was it, over 10 for 3 games last year, that's nuts.
yeah,
The Alamo Bowl was 8 million. That was the most viewers they got this year. So
yeah,
just interesting to see kind of the college football's grand experiment. That's what
yeah,
they deemed it, right, when Coach Prime got hired.
yeah. And so as far as thanking players, I mean, after the Alamo Bowl, after the post game press conference, Adam and I, we went out to the field to do our post game analysis, and we're walking through the tunnel, and where we had to walk from the interview room to the field, you actually had to walk by both locker rooms,
Yeah.
and we're walking
Who
by
did you
Sue's.
see? Who did you see? I had one guy I saw.
Well, I saw several, but Shador was standing out there
Oh,
with
you
some
did? Okay.
people, and I actually stopped and I said, "Hey, I just want to thank you for the 2 years and for always stepping up and talking to us after tough losses." I said it doesn't go unnoticed, and I think that um, for all the things people want to say about people, it's not easy for these guys, even if you're a pro, but it's not easy for these guys to sit up there and take our questions when you lose 30, what was it, 36-14 or whatever, or you get killed at Oregon, and for him to sit there and answer these questions. And, it's easy to do it when you win 52-0 against Oklahoma State. It's not as easy when, you lose the Alamo Bowl and it's your last game. And he did it time and time again. And I think Washington State last year might have been the only time that we didn't really get any players because that was just
That
well,
was the
Shador
worst
was
day.
injured. Shador got injured. Coach
Four
Prime was
sacks
sick
the
as a
first 10
dog.
snaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But other than that, Shador would talk to us all the time, and I wanted to thank him. I was glad I saw him. I don't know if he cared, but I walked by him and I stopped. I just want to thank you for that. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of guys. I wish I could have said the same thing to Cam and to Shiloh and a lot of those guys. Hey, I just appreciate all your time because they were gracious with it. And you know Shador talked to us more than most quarterbacks have, probably since
Cepho.
Montez.
Yeah.
Montez talked a
Cepho.
lot
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
but yeah, I was just appreciative of that, and it's not an easy thing. And so, yeah, we'll miss those guys because you know the little bit we got to know them, it was a great group, and it was a fun season. So, anything else you want to say as we wrap up this season, Matt?
Yeah, the only moment I had, and I think it's funny, it's kind of like opposite ends of the spectrum. I definitely would love to share those same sentiments, with the entire Sanders family. But I saw Charlie walking in the
Yeah,
tunnel, and I thought
yeah,
that was almost fitting. And I kind of put my arm, kind of gave him a tap on the back, put my arm
yeah,
around him, and
yeah,
like, what do you even say to a guy like Charlie Offerdahl in that moment who has seen the lowest of the lows that college football has to offer, and
Yeah.
also some of the highest of the highs that it has to offer as well. Like he has seen it all. I think I might have said like what a journey, like what a ride or something like that, you know,
Yeah.
and just gave him a pat on the back. But you could tell he was very emotional, as everybody is,
Yeah.
that this chapter in their lives are closing if they're moving on. So
Yeah.
just it was just funny seeing a guy like Charlie walking out of there. It was like, wow. Wow, think about what it looked like when he got there, because there was that moment of closure for all of us just being down there of the last 2 years. The last 2 years of our lives, for the most part, if we've been covering this program, have been about this season.
Mhm.
Like it, even last year, even all off season was all about this year. And
Well, we
I,
and
I
we all knew that. Those of us covering it, like, yeah, 23 people ripped them for how they finished, but it's like it's all about 2024. They're
it's
setting
that's
up for
what
2024.
100%. And so I definitely had a moment in these last couple of weeks where I was like, wow. Like the last 2 years, okay, it's like it was a 2 year ride.
Yeah.
Even last season, throughout all the games and all off season, it was all about this season. It was all about these 12, regular season games and, in a postseason game. And it was like, okay,
Yeah.
that's a chapter. Now we
Yeah.
close. Now
Yeah.
we close because it's over. And no matter what happened, and specifically for me, because I cover all these other sports, you certainly do see women's basketball and some of the basketball stuff and hoop stuff and other CU sports. But because I'm, in all these other seasons,
Yeah.
it felt different for me this time for this one because it felt like a 2 year process. And maybe the only other time it kind of felt like that was 2016 because it was all of the 27 seniors and we'd gotten
Yeah.
to know we'd been around Cepho for 4 years and that whole crew for 4 years and Phil and Cheeto, etc. That maybe that was the only time it was similar, but this ride was so different because it was on the main stage
Hmm.
that it felt even more emotional and even more stressful. And it took more out of you to just cover it because there was so much going on constantly. There's always something happening right
Yeah.
now. And I think for everybody involved, it's going to be very beneficial to everyone's psyche to get a little bit of a time down to just catch your breath because they're
Yeah.
going to, at least for those who are tied to the program, they got to kick the engines on and figure out how to, reinvent the wheel, quite
Yeah.
frankly, and
Yeah.
do it a different way. So, a very interesting transition period, certainly. And yeah, a fun ride, no doubt about it. One I won't soon forget.
Yeah. It's gonna be weird for a lot of us. And I remember Coach Prime after the game, he was asked about it being in the end, and he's like, he's sitting next to Cam and Shador, and he's like these guys will be fine. It's tough, but look, I'm emotional in part because these guys, I know there's more ahead, and that they now move on, and both these guys are going to think about what they could have done better against BYU, but they're both going to move on, and they got draft prep, and
Yeah.
there's a lot more than those two. I mean, there's a ton of guys that have draft prep. I mean, I don't even know the number right now off the top of my head, but there's a ton of guys that are playing in either the East West Shrine or the Hula Bowl and different bowl games to try to you know go to the NFL, and they're going to have these opportunities. And so yeah, it's a weird time because there's a lot of CU seasons that end, Matt, that it's like, yeah, these guys are all done playing football because they didn't have pro prospects on the team, and now it's like, oh, we get to see a lot of these guys probably on Sundays next year,
Oh yeah.
and a lot more than we've ever seen. And
Yeah.
but it's weird because it's the end of an era, and I'm
Depending
just glad it
upon
happened.
depending upon where Shador goes, he might start a game at Empower Field. I was reading their
Yeah,
opponents for next year. Giants are coming to town. I think the Titans are coming to town. I think Cleveland's coming to town again. Cleveland always comes to town, I think.
yeah,
So, like there's a bunch of
yeah,
opportunities that you might end up seeing Shador Sanders start a game against the Broncos next year too, which
yeah.
which I would definitely I I'll tell you one quick funny story since whoever's listening now at this point is a diehard fan.
Right,
Okay.
right. Our moms are listening.
Yeah, that's right. Your wife and my mom.
Yeah,
So the last time I went to a Broncos game, it must have been 13. My dad was. We entered some like stupid car dealership, John Elway, GMC, whatever contest, and it turned out to be this thing where it was a father and child, and you start at the 50 and you spread out and go in 10-yard increments and one throw, one catch, one throw, one catch till you get to the goal line,
yeah,
and then you had to kick a field goal within 60 seconds. Anyway, This was when Brian Greasy was playing for the Broncos. That was the last time I attended a Broncos game as a fan. The point was
Wow.
the point when that was what, early 2000s?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
And so if Shador starts, I'll be there as a fan.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I went
Maybe
one
we'll
time
all
this
go.
year. I went one time this year for the first time
Yeah.
in a while.
But you got
And
kids. It's different.
yeah,
Yeah.
I went because I brought my kid who
Right. That's
is
what
a
I'm
sports
saying.
fan. I got free
Yeah.
tickets and
I hate the
Bonex
NFL in person, but I would go watch Shador Sanders play quarterback.
and Bonex actually played exactly like he did when I watched him twice at Oregon. I was like, every
Yeah.
time I'm here, this guy plays like he's the best quarterback to ever play
Well, let's get
this
you to
game.
Buffalo
So
next week.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Matt, we're gonna keep doing these during the off season. Maybe not
Yeah.
weekly like we've been doing, but we'll see. But there's still a lot to talk about. I mean, we'll be back at some point next week. We can talk about what's going on in the transfer portal, looking ahead, because
Yeah.
while this season's over and we'll reminisce and all that, we got to move on. And,
Yep.
and there's a season coming up, and they're starting to get some guys here, and so the Buffs have some expectation next year too. So we'll be back throughout the off season at various times, and Matt will have his thing going on. I'll have stuff on my channel as well. And Matt, throw out your channel again.
Yeah, it's at Real Matt Smith, Matt with one T. Appreciate everybody
Okay.
and making sure you're on this video and liking and subscribing on this video as well. No question. It feels like I need one of those the movie thing where
Yeah.
you kind of click it at the end. It's like we're wrapped.
Yeah.
By the next week is our official first episode of the off season. So
Yeah.
right now we are about to close the chapter on the Shador and Travis era at Colorado.
And next week, do we get through an entire podcast and don't mention the names Shador and Travis?
No chance, but we'll try.
Okay. All right.
No chance.
Cool. Hey, have a good rest of your week.
You too, buddy. Good to
Thanks
talk.
everybody for watching.